Hi, just hopping online to answer a couple questions about Lightstrike in wine. This video is in response to some questions that were asked to me on Twitter by Michelle Monroe of 67 Pall Mall. She asks some very good questions about Lightstrike in wine, a topic that I discuss often. But to reply properly needs a little bit more time and space than Twitter allows. So I thought I'd make this quick video to be able to elaborate and give the questions their proper due. So these are the questions that I received from Michelle. So Lightstrike in wine, is it random? Sometimes it happens with a clear bottle and sometimes it doesn't. Is there an exposure threshold to UV above which it will definitely happen? Is it lumen related or is it time related? And will it always happen if the wine is exposed, for example, on a shelf? And last one, perhaps slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I'm not going to miss answering that one. Is should I retire my cellar disc ball? Okay, so taking the questions one at a time. Is it random? Yes and no. So unlike some other wine faults, it's not necessarily true that an entire batch of wine can be tainted with Lightstrike. The fault occurs bottle by bottle according to the exposure that that individual bottle has had. So even on a shelf at a shop, you could have bottles there. You pick one up, it's light affected. The one behind it or next to it, not so much, because depending on where that exposure to light occurred, could be somewhere in the supply chain or even back at the winery in the cellar. Bottles on the top of the case may have had some sunlight or white light hitting them, causing those bottles to be affected, and the ones lower down in the case, shielded by the ones above, are completely fine. And then when that gets unpacked onto a wine shop shelf, you've got some good bottles next to some bad ones. So the fault is random only in so much that you can't predict what exposure each individual bottle has had. Next part, is there an exposure threshold to UV above which it will definitely happen? Yes, there is. So not in terms of, well, yes, I suppose in terms of intensity of UV, but also the wavelengths in particular. So it's certain wavelengths of light that cause this light strike paint in wine. Particularly in the high 300s and mid 400s. So I think actually the two most critical ranges or wavelengths of light rather are 370 nanometers, which is in the UV spectrum, not visible, and 440 nanometers, which is visible but towards the blue end of the spectrum. So if you have light hitting the bottle in that range, you will have a light strike effect on the wine, according to any protective measures that might be in place. For example, glass color, which I'm going to come on to in a moment. Is it lumen related or time related? The answer to that is both. So the lumen in terms of the intensity, the power, the brightness of the light. So the more light the brighter the light is, the more photons you have hitting the wine, and therefore causing an effect. More likely they are to cause an effect. Time is you could probably guess by now, is also a factor. That low intensity light for a long period of time is just as harmful as higher intensity light for proportionally shorter time. But in general, you can say the brighter the light that's hitting the wine, the worse the problem is going to be, and also the longer that the wine is exposed to the light, the more likely you are to have an issue. What's going on with Lightstrike, in case people aren't familiar, is that you've got some B vitamins, surprisingly, maybe some B vitamins that naturally occurring in wine, specifically riboflavin and pantothenic acids, so B2 and B5. Those are in wine. They are photosensitive, meaning they're activated by light at certain wavelengths, And when riboflavin and pantothenic acid, B2 and B5, get activated by light, they go looking for other wine components to interact with. If your wine has sulfur-containing amino acids, which are methionine and cysteine, riboflavin, the light-affected B2 and B5 will interact with those sulfur-containing amino acids and make very unpleasant smells in the wine. So the compounds that are produced are dimethyl sulfides or dimethyl disulfides and even hydrogen sulfide. So those are in the spectrum of things like cooked cabbage, onion, garlic, even wet wool can be a descriptor for a light affected wine. I often get a character that reminds me of sort of stagnant drain water, and that's all related to this reaction between B vitamins from the wine and the amino acids in the wine. How do you get amino acids in your wine? Lees contact is one of the main ways. I mean, there are naturally amino acids occurring in grape juice, but if you want to have higher levels of methionine and cysteine, normally means extended yeast contact, which means in turn sparkling wines, traditional method sparkling wines, aged on their lees for months, years, etc., are more likely to have a higher level of cysteine and methionine, therefore more sensitive, more reactive to light. So in my experience, sparkling wines that have been exposed to light are the most likely to be affected, followed by still white wines, and least of all, red wines. Red wine, the reason why Lightstrike isn't such an issue in red wine is twofold. One, it rarely gets packaged in clear glass, so more often in green or dark colored glass, and you'll see shortly why that's more important. But also because the tannins, even the color molecules in wine, but particularly the tannins in red wine, absorb the energy of light. So the tannins kind of intercept the light before it has a chance to activate those B vitamins and cause the unpleasant smell. White wine and particularly sparkling wine have much lower tannin content, and therefore don't have that self-protective effect, if I could put it that way. I'm going to switch over now just to show a little bit more about this glass color and light effect. So there's a really good report. I mean, very technical writing. But if you want to, a decent amount of background on light and wine and what producers can do about it packaging wise, search for RAP. This RAP report, Lightstrike wine, it'll come up as one of the top search results. You can read it, and I've got a graph here that I've screen captured out of that report, showing the protective effect of different glass colors on wine, how well they inhibit the transmission of certain light. So glass type C, which is clear glass, you can see that the transmission rate, which means how well the light flows through the glass, is quite high, even at very low wavelengths. So that line marked with C, it's a navy line. At least it shows up as navy on my screen. Jumps up to almost full transmission at pretty much all wavelengths, which sort of makes sense. It's clear glass; it lets everything through. The green colored line, and also marked with a G, is the transmission rate of green glass, and you see some protective effects at the relevant wavelengths between 370 and 440. Particularly 440 green glass can intercept a decent amount of light, so you do get some protection. However, best of all, the winner in this context is the brown line, or amber colored line, marked with an A, which representing amber colored glass. So here's an example of an amber bottle. We use this at My Timber. It actually looks black, but if you could get a close look or under certain lighting conditions, you can see it really is a dark brown or dark amber glass. You'll see no transmission of light at the relevant wavelengths for Lightstrike. So 370 nanometers, 440 nanometers, you can see there's no passage of light through the dark amber glass. Only when you get into longer wavelengths, so reds and oranges, etc., which aren't harmful to the wine, then that a small amount of that light can get through, but still you're only looking at 20% transmission. So really good protective effect with the dark amber glass. Just returning back to Michelle's questions. Is it lumen related or time related? Yep, we've covered that. Will it happen if the wine is exposed, for example, on a shelf? Yes, the answer is always. So every photon that happens to hit the wine will have some sort of effect, causing a reaction. So that can be in a bottle at home, could be in a bottle on a shelf, could be somewhere in the supply chain if wine happens to get unpacked to be repackaged. And it can even happen in bulk back at the winery. So if a producer is bottling or handling the wines in a way that light can contact the wine, you will have some light strike there. So if light hits the wine at anywhere along the production process, it will be forming some sort of it will be forming these unpleasant aromas. Unfortunately, it's a great irony in my mind that grapes, sunlight and UV light is a great friend of grapes. So to produce delicious grapes, you need a lot of light, and particularly sunlight. As soon as you convert that into wine, though, sunlight becomes the enemy. So it works completely against anything you're trying to do quality-wise. Near the end there, Michelle asked, do all wavelengths cause light strike, even LEDs? So no, not all wavelengths. It's particularly 370 nanometers, which we can't see, and 440 nanometers, which we can see. So white light cover those spectrum. As the light color gets warmer, so in yellows and towards orange, you have less of those short wavelengths, and therefore less of an issue. But any sort of whitish light is problematic. LEDs, the answer to LEDs is yes and no. It depends on what the color is. So you can get certain LEDs you can sort of tailor to whatever wavelength you want. So if it's a bright white LED, then it would be producing light in the relevant spectrum to cause a problem. However, as I understand it, the intensity of LEDs can be lower, so it's not so much of a problem. It's from artificial or indoor lighting, it's the fluorescent tubes that are the worst offenders. And should I retire my cellar disco ball? Yes and no. I think if you love the cellar disco ball, you can keep it up. I would just recommend using reds and oranges and those longer wavelengths light to create the disco effect. If at all possible, try to avoid a blue disco. Anyway, hopefully that was helpful and useful. Thanks for tuning in, and that's all for now. Bye.